Thanks for coming, everybody. My name's Lee, and I'm here to introduce the rest of the previous Next guys who have done some brilliant work on the NovaFM website, which I believe is a responsive-based site. I actually did the design for it, but I can't take any credit because I did the easy bit, and these guys made it come to life. So we've got Jack Taranto, Nick, I'm sorry, I don't know your surname. I can't. She, and Christian Biggins. So please take it away, Jack.
Thanks very much, Lee. Cool. So as Lee just mentioned, my name's Jack Taranto. I'm a front-end developer and themer, and I've been working with Previous Next for about 3 years. Might even be coming up on 4 years now. I've worked on a huge variety of projects doing theming for heaps of different stuff, small sites and really big sites like NovaFM. And Christian Biggins and Nick Shu will also be speaking. So we'll be covering a largely technical overview of Nova's site. It says on the session that it's a beginner, but it's probably actually more like an intermediate. So hopefully that doesn't scare any people away. But we'll be showing you lots of different code examples and things like that, focusing specifically on the responsive design, and Christian will be taking you through the enormous data migration task, and Nick will be focusing on hosting and GeoIP. So Nova came to us and they wanted a complete, I've got a spelling mistake there, but that's all right. They wanted a complete redesign of their entire website. So it was based on a totally custom CMS, which had evolved organically over quite a few years, and it had like tons of different stuff added into it. It didn't really have any, like the original structure was completely lost. So yeah, they came to us, we had to redesign that. We had to migrate all of the data, and we had to build it and make it responsive as well. So it was a pretty immense task. The total development time, I think, was maybe around 3 months. I'm not exactly sure. There was about 5 of us working on it, I think, at the most, maybe 6. So there were hundreds, literally hundreds of thousands of nodes that we had to migrate. There was an immense amount of advertising. The whole site's advertising based, and every page has got ads all over it. And it's mainly, thanks to, it's a really media heavy site as well. So there's images everywhere, there's video everywhere, and there's sound files and everything. And also there's 5 stations, one for Sydney, Brisbane, Adelaide, Melbourne and Perth. And they're all the content served from the same site. And yeah, the whole thing's responsive. So a look at the stats before we released the site. They had 1.5 million unique visitors per month. They had 3 million page views, and 2.5 minutes was the average time spent on the site. So that jumped up to 32% more in unique visitors, and yeah, 64% increase in page views, and the time on site almost doubled to 4 minutes. So I'll be taking you through a few things around the responsive design. I'll be focusing on the base theme and what we chose and some of the custom stuff that went into that. I'll be going into a lot of detail about responsive advertising and the media choices as well that we made. So, getting started, we had a few obstacles in picking a theme to choose. So we had not very much time to choose something, or not very much time to implement something. We needed something that was going to be reliable, and it also needed to be based on 960 grid system, which is what Lee's designs use. So we could have possibly built a custom theme with a custom grid system and implemented, all sorts of different stuff to get that happening. But it kind of made sense to pick a Drupal base theme that was solid and had, all the hard work done for us, basically. So we used Amiga to do that. It's probably one of the biggest. I think it might even have the biggest user base of Drupal's responsive themes. So that's a pretty big plus going for it. At the time, it was version 3.0, I think. So that was another good thing. It's got an awesome grid system which uses collapsing column widths. So it's got different grids that you can choose, 12, 24 column grids, and the grid widths shrink down as the page width collapses. So, and it's also got some other good stuff like JavaScript body classes, so the device width adds a body class to the page and can then use that to manipulate stuff later on. So the grid system, you can see an example there. I've got the desktop version and then kind of the shrunk down version for a tablet. You can see how the various regions in the header resize, the navigation's resized, the logo's resized. So there's a little bit of custom stuff that went into that, but the Amiga region grid layout system helped heaps in putting that together. We were literally able to lay out the bulk of the site, like the base theme of the site, the header and the footer and all that kind of stuff in maybe a day or maybe 2 days, something like that. So some other stuff went into making the responsive site really stand out. The grid system is probably one of the most obvious things. It uses these tiles, which are based on the medium rec size. So medium rec is like an advertising format size. It's 300 pixels by 250 pixels. So these pages that you see here are like standing listing pages. So all the content is arranged in these thumbnails, and there's actually advertising inserted. You can see there at the top and the bottom. So these grids collapse based on the device width. So you've got 3 columns for a desktop, 2 columns for a tablet. And then the mobile version, they kind of shrink down and become much smaller. So it's once it gets down to a mobile size, it becomes fluid. Yeah, so it stretches out to fill the page. Yeah. We also use CSS media queries to hide certain regions on the page. So we had the example I've got here. There's 2 regions at the top. They're mobile-only navigation regions. So they're actually in the same HTML that the desktop version gets, but they just use a CSS media query to set display none, so they get hidden from the user and only displayed on the mobile version. So it was all this kind of stuff that went into it to get the responsive site happening. It was the first responsive site I'd actually built at the time, so it was kind of the whole thing was a learning experience, but we got there in the end. So the next, probably the hardest thing about implementing the whole responsive side was the advertising. So we have tons of different sizes and formats. We've got different device widths, and the ads need to be specific for each device. So you can see an example here. I've got the desktop version in the top. It's got like a full width ad skin kind of thing. Then the tablet version on the side there uses leaderboards extensively. Mobile version only shows MREX. So each ad, each different device sees different ads basically, and it's so difficult because you've actually got one because the site's responsive, you've only got one version of the HTML, so you're not serving different HTML for different devices. And all the ad tags are in the HTML. So, I mean, you could just hide the ad, like the particular div that the ad renders. You could just hide that with a media query and say don't show up for mobiles. But it will, like the ad engine will still record impressions for that ad. So you have to figure out some way of only putting the ad tag in the page for certain devices. And it's all, it's kind of unnecessarily difficult. I think if the ad companies, we were using DoubleClick, if the ad companies were on board with it, it would probably be quite a simple thing to do. There might actually be some guys out there that do it, but I don't think the major guys like DoubleClick have any real way. You're able to embed like a JPEG version of the ad or something like that. But yeah, you can't actually say this ad is only meant to show up on this screen size. So JavaScript was the obvious choice there to embed the ad tag. So we wrote a custom jQuery plugin, which was about it was probably only about maybe 40 lines of code or something like that. It was quite simple, really, and it took advantage of the Modernizer media query. So Modernizer media query is exactly the same as a CSS media query. It's just in JavaScript. So it talks to the browser, it gets the device width, and it either returns true or false, based on your media query. So you can put CSS media queries into JavaScript and then take advantage of them. So then it was just a matter of writing a couple of lines, which took like the actual Google ad code and then put that into the page. So instead of embedding the actual ad tag, we just use this little call to the plugin. It just tells the jQuery plugin which div to render the ad in, and then you can actually just specify the screen size, mobile, tablet, desktop, and then the ad will show for the appropriate size. So there were kind of a few limitations in that way of working. We still had to use CSS to hide the ad block from users in case you might have a user on a desktop which is resizing their browser window or something like that. So if they shrink it down, you want to hide the ad and not break it. But that was a problem. Then you wouldn't have ads. You wouldn't have ads reloading in that case. So if people are shrinking the size down and stuff, the ads might not necessarily appear. But for the bulk of cases, it kind of works pretty well, really. So now onto media. This is just a small splattering of some of the stuff they've got going on. Virtually every article or node on the site has some form of image or video or gallery or something like that. You can see we've got like YouTube. We've got YouTube video players. We've got Brightcove video players. We've got views, slideshow galleries, Flow Player audio, and the biggest difficulty with it all is that the actual developers hadn't really implemented very much responsive stuff at all. So even YouTube and things like that aren't really straightforward to put into a responsive site, which is probably might have come a long way since then. This is kind of the end of 2011 that we were doing this sort of stuff, so it might be a little bit different now. So Flow Player gives us the audio player, which is used for podcasts and songs and things like that. It's relatively simple. They've got a kind of a beta version plugin. So it's just a matter of embedding that JavaScript, and then you're just able to add iPad to the end, and that gives you a HTML audio tag or video tag. So it was relatively simple. Nothing too tricky there. It doesn't quite work as well as an actual embedded audio player, which gives you like a play button inside your mobile. But yeah, it does seem to work okay. YouTube requires some pretty funky CSS. You have to create a div wrapper, and then you have to set it as position relative. I haven't actually got that in there. But yeah, you set it as position relative, and then the iframe, Google's iframe gets absolute, and then you set its width based on its parent. So it's kind of totally hacky, really, if you look at the code. It's setting weird paddings and stuff like that. There's a few different ways to do this as well. Different people have come up with different stuff, and if you search the net, you can find all sorts of stuff like that. YouTube's iframe embed is actually good because they've got two versions of the player. They've got a HTML5 player and a Flash player, and it'll show like the HTML5 player for a phone or whatever, and the Flash player for desktop. So that is something good. And yeah, Brightcove was kind of its own thing. I think I don't really know. If that many people actually use it, but Nova has like tons of their videos on Brightcove, and they use it to put ads inside videos and all that kind of stuff. So it was really important for them. But it's kind of nasty because it's putting width and height values into like deep inside its video tags. So it's not adding it to the object tag, which would be kind of workable. It's adding it to the param element, which is a little bit annoying. So you have to actually, that code there is just checking the body class, and then it's adding, it's manually updating the width and the height values. So that works for a mobile, and then the tablet version is separate, so you have to manually kind of like hard code the width and stuff into your JavaScript, which is pretty difficult to work with. But the solution actually worked. If you check out Brightcove on the site, you can resize it and stuff like that, and it does work. Amiga was great to work with. It was the first site I built with Amiga, but gone on to build heaps more after that. It was really handy in all the kind of stuff that it's got set up already. It doesn't really work the way Drupal works. Like, it's kind of an anti-Drupal theme in a lot of ways. It kind of implements its own like pre-processed files and stuff like that, and it's got its own way of getting like standard Drupal variables into templates, and it's got heaps of extra templates which it just invents. And so it's a little bit of a challenge working with it. And for newcomers, it might be a little, like if you're getting into the dirty kind of nitty-gritty of it, it's a little bit tricky, but it is a great theme. And modernizer media queries kick ass. I think there might be another JavaScript that does. I can't remember what it is, but they're really handy. They give you CSS media queries in JavaScript, so that's awesome. And like a big slap on the chops for the media guys for not coming to the party. They could it could be a lot better. I mean, things will improve over time. I think responsive sites are becoming the norm. So yeah. All right, I'll pass on to my colleague, Mr. Christian Biggins, and he'll take you through content migration. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Christian. I've been with Previous Next for a couple of years. I have a fair bit of background in data and migrations in general from pre-Drupal days. So I was brought in to handle the content migration for Nova. You got my slides in the wrong order, Jack. Anywho, so the considerations. When I was brought into this, we had the existing Nova site was a bespoke application. It had no structured schema at all. It was on a Windows system with a MS SQL database. There was lots and lots of content, like hundreds of thousands of rows, and there was relationships literally between each row. Everything was connected one way or another. The content and media were stored in different locations. So some content was stored in a table specific to that content, whereas others were stored in different tables. So for an example of that was that A video might be stored in its own video table, but it also could be stored in the articles table using an embed code. So it made it pretty difficult to make sure that you were pulling videos from the right places. Challenges, there was duplicate rows for the multiple sites. Jack touched on how there's localized sites for the station. There's 5 that we migrated. Each site would have its own content as its own row. So if one article was to be published across the 5 sites, there would be 5 versions of that article. Because of that, there was lots and lots of edge cases, scenarios where code had been changed and the schema had been modified to handle a single scenario. Also, not all the content was to be imported because we were only handling 5 of the sites, but there were many other sites that we weren't actually migrating. They were going to stick with their CMS. An example of the relationships that we had. So if there was an album on the site, the album would have been created by a user. The album would have tags associated to it. It would have an artist and an image, and these were pretty much the equivalent of having entities. But it would also have lots of manually entered related content. So there would be the manually configured related content block on the side, and everything would have one of those. So we had to make sure that all of these relationships were maintained across the migration. We had lots and lots of potential issues. The biggest problem that we were facing was the chicken and egg scenario, and that is what do we migrate first? How do we ensure that the user record is there when it's needed to be, when we're trying to provide the author attribute on the album? Is there an order that we need to perform them in so that we get that? How do we ensure that we don't get any duplicates, considering there was so many duplicate data already in the tables? So our options for handling this was custom code, which was pretty quickly discarded. Only we had pretty strong time restraints, and it was going to be really, really hard to make sure that our relationships were maintained after the migration. The feeds module was another option. At the time, there was very little documentation on it, and it wasn't going to work very well with the unstructured schema that we were facing. So that pretty much left us with the migrate module. So the migrate module gave us lots of ways that we could work with what was coming in. The mapping of columns and fields was just so easy, and it gave us methods for pretty much every stage of the migration, from pulling the query out and altering the data to before the entity is saved or after the entity is saved if you needed that, and stubs, which I'm going to get onto in a minute, which would allow us to create entities or placeholders for data that's not yet migrated to assist us in maintaining the relationships. Lastly, migrations would occur in batches, so super easy if you're doing it through the UI and you know the connection drops out, you can just take off from where you were. You can use Drush to kick them off. So the migration mapping is literally that easy. You would have a query above, just your typical normal SQL query, and you would provide the column that you're migrating from and the field name that you're migrating to. There are other options that you can set, such as the whether or not it's going to be HTML or plain text or anything. The bottom mapping there sets a source migration. So this is in the case that you might want to create a stub for data that is not yet imported. It's just an example of using the complete method, which is performed after the entity has been created and saved, and you can make any changes to that entity. So in that example, if you wanted to ensure that the user's avatar had been downloaded properly and saved, you could do that, or you could go and get it if you wanted to do it after the migration, because the entity is already existing. Prepare method runs after the entity's been created, but before it's been saved, so you can handle any manipulation you needed to there. I'm simply adding a role to the entity before it's sent off to get saved. And prepare row is after the row's been pulled out of the database, but before the entity's been created. So this is just another step earlier. And here all I'm doing is creating a URI faux column, if you will, for where the actual full path of the file. So a little introduction to the stubs, which I mentioned. The scenario we have is if we migrated an album and that album had an author attributed to it with an ID, a legacy ID of 999, Migrate module knows that that user doesn't actually exist yet. We haven't imported it yet. It will go off and create a stub user. So it will go off and create an entity that's full of placeholder fields that you specify, you define those. And then it creates with the fields that you've specified, it will create a Drupal user, or it could be an entity, it could be a node, anything you wanted. So it's created as a Drupal user with a user ID of 100. It will then go and update the album record that we've just imported with that user ID, so that we've got that relationship maintained. Now what will happen is when the actual user record is migrated through its own migration, Migrate will identify that that user has a record already that's been created through a stub, and it will update the stub with the data that you specify in your mapping. So in this scenario, what we've done is created an album without a user record and then updated the user as the information's become available. The stub's really easy to create. You basically have this in your method, in your migrate class. So in the user migration class, you would literally have this method, which just creates a stub with the minimum required fields input. Word of warning is that users actually need unique email addresses. So what I'm not showing here is just a function that you have to write to make sure that the email addresses are unique so that it will actually save. After the migration, I've got my introduction slide next, Jack, thanks. After the migration, we were just running the batch module. Just had a few batches that we set up to make sure that all nodes had the files associated and were on the file system. We were able to perform a whole bunch of different tests to ensure that the structure was maintained and relationships especially. Also able to make sure that the content could be accessed from the same URI, the same path. So just to ensure that when the site actually went live, all the URLs remained the same, or at least the redirections worked. And there's my introduction slide. I'm going to pass over to Nick, who's going to just run through the hosting. Just run through it.
Thanks, Christian. Okay, so with NovaFM, with the consolidation of these 5 websites, coming into the new Drupal site, we wanted to set up a new piece of infrastructure that was sort of Drupal-centric, and it was scalable, easy to use, and flexible. Oh, by the way, my name's Nick. Completely skipped to the thing. Yep, I'm a developer at Previous Next. I've been here for about 6 to 9 months now, and I've taken over some sysadmin duties too. So now I'll start talking about the host infrastructure. Okay, so the hosting infrastructure that we went through, I'll go through the first and foremost host. That's the load balancer. And it's an F5 firewall load balancer that does round-robin balancing. Round-robin balancing is actually pretty simple in concept. As seen in the diagram, 5 users are hitting the site. Those are what those numbers under the hosts are. User 1 comes in, hits the first app server, 2, 3, 4, and then 5 comes back around to the first again, and it'll just keep working its way down. The next class is app servers, application servers. These come in 2 flavors. We have active hosts, so those are the ones that are currently running right now. We have 4 of those running in a cluster setup, and we also have inactive hot spares on the side ready to be added into the load balancer if needed, or powered on and then added into the load balancer. All these hosts come with Varnish, Apache, PHP, and Memcache. I'll just quickly go through those. Varnish is a caching service that you can put in front of your web host. So it'll cache up the HTML files, etc. So it's really snappy every time once primed. Apache's your web server, and PHP. And Memcached is what we're using to cache we're using it on our Drupal site, the Memcached module, and passing off all the cache data to Memcached and stored in memory on the host. All this configuration is Puppet managed, and what Puppet is it's a manifest kept in code, and it provides install and update instructions. So if we were to spin up a new host, we can install Puppet, give it a blueprint for what the site's going to be, and it'll spin it up, and we can start adding more and more if we need to, if there's a case for it. If anyone wants to talk about any of these, like Varnish, Puppet, yeah, definitely pop around after, and we'll have a chat. And lastly, the code base gets deployed via Drupal Capistrano. And what this means is, with one command, we can git control. We can push our code base up to every single app server, so everyone gets the same experience across app 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. It also eliminates any risk of things being missed. So very, very handy. These app servers connect to some storage. So in this case, we're using MySQL, DB, and Solr. These are replicated across 2 hosts. I actually have a diagram in a future slide where I can sort of show you through, but these operate in a master-slave kind of setup. So if one host was to go down, the other one can take over and keep going. We also have some NAS file storage across all the app servers. This allows for all static assets like images, podcasts. I know they have a lot of podcasts up there, to be served out across all app servers, because if someone uploads an image on the first app server, you want it across 2, 3, 4, and etc. It also handles, for Drupal, the settings.php, so every app server knows how to connect to the database host. And if you make a change, every host has it mounted up, so it's consistent. That is also Puppet managed in the manifest, so we can push that out to all those storage-related hosts. For the website, we also use CDN. We use the Drupal module CDN, and what this does is we provide a URL of cdn.novafm.com.au. It rewrites it to, in this case, Edgecast. And Edgecast stores the CSS, JavaScript images, and that means, as you can see on this map, they have a lot of stores. And if I were in another country, it'll load nice, fast, snappy. Okay, so what we have in front of here is a diagram of the hosting infrastructure. So at the top we've got our load balancer, F5 load balancer. Below is our app server cluster. To the right we have our spares. These all undergo the same patching and code updates as their active counterparts. We also have the NAS on the left, the file storage, which connects to all these hosts, or these hosts connect to it. And then we've got the storage for Solr and MySQL. So as you can see, master of Solr doesn't also have master of MySQL on the same host, and they swap. So if one host were to go down, it would move across. Okay, so with all this in mind, with NovaFM, there's definitely content that goes viral. I I think when I came on to NovaFM, NovaFM was already up, and they were doing competitions, and I learnt about, they called it the One Direction effect. So, and what that was, and I'll tell you what it is. In this case, we've got 17. That's in 1 hour. That's 18,000 hits. So, and I guess what has to be considered is what type of what type of page is it that they're hitting? Like what's going on? And is it cached? Is it not cached? And I'll go into that a little bit more. But in the case of being cached, that's fine. It's not really that noticeable. If we're not, we're in trouble. So scaling and large traffic. So sometimes content goes viral, one direction. And what are the options? So with all these things in mind, we've learnt from our mistakes. Maybe when we push up some content that we know may go viral, or there's a competition coming that we may know that goes viral, we can provision in advance. We can maybe get some hosts into the pool beforehand, get it added into the load balancer, so it's less work at the time and less worry. But I guess the thing that we have to consider is, at that stage, is it going to be a video where it's cached, the page is cached, and it's just going to maybe a YouTube clip or something, or in the case of NovaFM, the competitions require a login. The user has to be logged into the site, which means that they're not anonymous anymore, meaning that that the site's not cached. This means that whoever wins the competition, they know who it is and they're legit across the site. And if this is the case, we definitely have to consider like adding hosts, increasing resourcing on existing hosts, so beef up what we've already got. And sometimes you don't get the chance to provision in advance, and at a very last call, write it out. No. Oh. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So next we have geolocation. So as my colleagues have said, we had 5 websites. So the case was, NovaFM has 5 websites: Adelaide, Brisbane, Melbourne, Perth, Sydney. And they were all coming into the one Drupal site, and we had to ensure that that user base were actually getting directed to the correct content. So if I was in Brisbane, I want to see Brisbane content. I don't want to see that a station's on right now or a program's on right now and flick to the radio and it's not, because that's just annoying. So yeah, we need to make it as easy as possible. So enter Apache mod GeoIP2. So a quick little overview is GeoIP offer a city and a light version. In this case, we went with the light version, as City is a paid service, and it gives you a database that you can update, or it's more frequently updated because it's very granular. In this case, the major cities aren't going anywhere, but if someone in their app were to purchase the paid version, they would do it because they want to know street numbers and street addresses and that kind of granularity, that really low granularity. So we went with the static copy of the free GeoIP Lite database. So the benefits of that were the configuration was within the Apache vhost configuration, so we didn't have to bootstrap Drupal. So if we were to put this kind of logic in Drupal, we would be bootstrapping Drupal, like firing up the site, checking where they were, and then redirecting to the appropriate URL for the station. So that's 2 bootstraps for the same thing that we can do right there in Apache. And yeah, the redirect is cached too. Okay. So with all this in mind, after it was all implemented, we ran into a few issues. So each station gets a header set for it. So once they're redirected to so if I was redirected to Brisbane, I would get a header of that station. That means that when I go to a competitions page, all the content or all the related content is Brisbane-esque, Brisbane related. I'm not seeing anything Sydney related. I'm not sort of getting pushed to other stations' content. And the issue that we ran into from doing this is Drupal caches its page and uses the URL as the key. So in this case, you can see competitions, it would have the page cached with the key as competitions. But we don't want that, because if I'm in Brisbane and someone's already primed the cache and created that cache in Sydney, I'll be seeing Sydney content. So how do we get around this? Varnish. So we use Varnish to interpret the header. And as you can see in this diagram, I'm IC/competitions. Varnish rewrites the URL to add this NovaFM station key on the end, and that's what Drupal caches. And I don't see that. That's deeper level stuff. I don't see that in the browser. I never see that. And what we now have is, if all the stations are, if 5 people from different areas are viewing that one competitions page, that's five versions of the page being cached now by Drupal. And before this, myself and Mig had a bit of a chat, and how could this be improved? How could we improve what we have already? Drupal's setting the header, Apache's doing the rewrite, Varnish is doing this really nice rewrite of the URL that the end user doesn't know about. And it turns out that Varnish now, in version 3, there's a vmod for GeoIP. And what this would mean is we could set the cookie all in Varnish, and we could set that URL in Varnish, and we could do the redirects. This would simplify the approach down. This would mean that we don't have like Apache doing a little bit, Drupal doing a little bit, and Varnish doing a little bit. Bring it in, and it means that we're not locked into Apache no more. Where we could go Nginx or something along those lines moving forward. Adds more flexibility. So, in conclusion, we now moving forward have an environment with more options of scale, and with everything going on, we now know that we need some forewarning if content's going to go viral. That's definitely a lesson that we've learned moving forward, and I believe the relationship between us and the client, like the client knows when something's going to go viral, and the conversation starts most of the time. Sometimes you just don't know. And the last one is, GeoIP is a great solution. There's definitely many ways to implement it, so across Apache or Varnish. So, cool. That's it.
I think we've got another 15 minutes or so if there's questions.
Oh, sweet. Yeah, so definitely.
Yeah, come on. Go for it. Mossy. So the question was, could we use the user agent to sniff out the browser? Yeah, instead of a media query. Yeah, I guess the problem with that approach is you're not so much sniffing out devices or browsers. You actually need the device width. Yeah, I don't know if you can. I don't know if you can actually get that in the user agent or not. You can. Yeah, that could work too. Yeah, there'd be tons of different ways of doing it. There wasn't too much additional JavaScript in the page. There was kind of like for each ad tag, there was just that one line that you saw. Yeah. So that adds the ad tag in. Yeah. Yeah, I basically just chose that way because it seemed like the simplest way for me to be able to implement it. Yeah. Cool.
Question is, what was any CSS preprocessor used?
Yeah, the question was the CSS. Did we use a CSS preprocessor? Yeah, we used SAS. Yeah.
Next one, did you use the CSS module and how, like, to compile everything and how did everything integrate with Omega?
So to add to that, how did we compile SAS and integrate it with Omega? Omega's got a bunch of different CSS files that it spits out for layout. It's got different CSS files for each layout version. So we literally just had a SAS file in our theme, a SAS folder in our theme, and it had like SAS versions of all the Omega style sheets. And then we just ran the compiler locally and then checked the compiled CSS into GitHub. Yeah. Yeah, is that a Drupal module? Yeah, there's also Sassy or Suzy or something like. No, I think it's called Sassy. Yeah. Yeah, we didn't use Compass. We kind of had our own library of mix-ins and things like that. We had a variables file and like a base partials file with mix-ins and stuff like that. But we didn't really. This was kind of back in 2011. I've only really started using Compass recently, so yeah, it was probably a bit before that time. Yeah. At the back.
Yep.
How do you manage user-generated contents between different servers? Like in real time, if I go to the server one,
Yep.
create some contents there, or do you manage it with the second server?
Oh, okay. So the question was, how do you manage content across all, for example, all 4 app servers? So the database is external to the app servers. So all 4 hosts are connecting to that database for that record. And in terms of files, because that's mounted up on storage, each host has its files directory mounted up in storage. The files available on all 4. Yep.
So how do you mount the NAS? Like, is it externally using that? The NAS is mounted? How does it mount it to?
Yeah.
It's mounted to a directory in the FSTab, and the site's default files is the same. Oh, yeah. Another question.
Yep.
So you said, like, in the peak, when you know that there is an event going on,
Yep.
did you guys try to think about a way to let the editors or well, like the customer to create some kind of a special event, node or some trigger to spin up a new instance, rather than as far as they call you and saying that we have this event and you guys prepare a provision for us.
So, yeah. Yep. So you're. Oh, okay. No. So the question was, when creating content, is there some kind of automation to? Yep. 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 Yep.
So when they expect a high volume of
Yep.
visitors, they
Oh, can they do that? So.
do the spin
Oh, okay. So, So do NovaFM have the means to spin up extra app servers? Or automatically? No, that's all. We have a pretty tight relationship between NovaFM and the hosting provider. So it's really all discussions between the 3 of us. Yep.
There's also some technical reasons as well, adding in machines into the F5, like so yeah, it's doing a manual task. So there's no way of giving. Is this a provider limitation or it's more of
Probably architectural limitation.
yeah, I think it requires a major change in the F5. There's some other reasons that we need to, if those hosts have been that we're adding have been CI, and you just you can really test with lots of stuff, and you can spin up automatically, and you can just have your once the machine is up, it's pretty automated.
Yeah.
Deployment, you can update the config, we do a cap deployment, and then the hosting provider has to use the F5.
Yep.
Did you guys use any?
It's all
Oh,
right.
so,
for it.
sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just last one.
Yeah.
Do you use any continuous integration for testing coverage?
At the time, no. It's a methodology that we've recently started kicking on, and it's definitely something that is that something that you've taken on, continuous integration? Because I'd love to talk with people and see what they do to solve it. Absolutely. Well, yeah. Well, I'd love to chat afterwards. That's for sure, because it's definitely top of mind. It has been for the past. Not on this project. No, not at that stage.
At the back.
What method did you use to classify the content across the 5 different stations? Like, was it just a taxonomy term, or something more like domain access for the rest of the user?
I know you go.
So the question was, how do we classify content to stations? Yeah, it was all taxonomy based. There was just one taxonomy with 5 terms, and when content editors are creating content, they can just choose one or more of the stations. Yeah. Yeah.
So is for all those servers you've got running, like your own hardware, or are they just all virtualized?
Yep. Yeah. They're all VPSs hosted by another company. So.
You said when you migrated data, you didn't have the user, so you have to say the user again and say the node again. So why didn't you import the user first?
So the question was, why I didn't import the user first? The user was the easiest way for me to explain how stubs worked. The relationships went across everything. So an album would have an artist record, and that artist record also has a user. That artist record also has tags, etc. And this was across every piece of content: articles, artists, albums, videos, songs, audio, you name it. So there was no starting point. There was nowhere where you could start. Yeah, users was probably the only thing we could have imported on its own initially, but everything else, there was just far too many connections involved.
Yeah, just following on from Nick's question about VPSs, you're all using VPSs. You have to, talk to your suppliers and make sure that they didn't all put the VPSs all on the same hardware nodes, that they weren't all competing for the same resources. Did you try and get them sort of separated, or didn't worry about it?
I'm not sure. I actually wasn't across the project at that stage. I was post MIG. Yep, absolutely MIG.
I'll just say this particular hosting provider, they're very experienced with really, really big sites, and they're city-based. And it's almost like policy that everything is sort of segregated. There's no sort of overview. It's all being one.
Do they increase the capacity based on the nodes level, or just based on the user? If you have more nodes, the server gets upgraded.
No, nothing's automated.
Nothing's. There's no. Sorry, the question was, does the scaling of the host reflect nodes or users? No, it doesn't. It's more of a. It's very static, but it's sort of monitoring performance and how much resources are taken over a period of time. Yep. And should we upgrade moving forward?
Was something automatic looked at? So was it one of the options to go for a system that did pull servers and pull them over here? If why didn't go ahead?
I'm not sure. The question was automation considered in the beginning of the project?
I think it was that the hosting provider doesn't really offer any
think a big consideration is that there was no, at least major Australian-based cloud providers towards the end of 2011. So there was simply no option for an automated system at all. Yeah, well, there's lots of options now. Absolutely, if you were to do it now, it'd probably be a lot more things to consider. Oh.
Hey, thought I.
Yep.
Because I saw it there. So the imported data, did it contain any kind of, invalid HTML or some kind of, what was the methods used to clean up or,
So the question was, how did we clean the data? We tried lots and lots of ways to try to automate the data cleaning. In the end, because some content was plain text, and like I said, lots of things were embedded files. In the end, it was just all tags were stripped out. There was lots of JavaScript embedded in a lot of the content, so it was literally as if someone had saved the page as it sat and then whacked it in the database. So there was lots of importing of scripts. There was no way to safely ensure that what we would end up with was valid, safe HTML. So there was lots of things that we were able to keep, strong tags and things like that, but the majority of tags were just stripped out on the way through. Yep.
Related, so dealing with a large volume of data to import, how do you go about testing the migrated content, testing scripts?
So the question is, how do we test the migration? We just grabbed samples of certain content of each different type, and then matched it against the database that we imported from the legacy system. So there was no, we weren't comparing with a live site. We were comparing with the database and then writing queries to match as well as we could. The cleaning scripts and the testing scripts were rewritten dozens and dozens of times because we would get 90% through and there'd be one single case where it wasn't the same, and so that would have to be included. So yeah, absolutely, and that's where I sing the praise of the batch module. It just makes that stuff very easy.
at the end of this migration, all that content, what is the volume, what is the percentage of the content is actually archived, and what is accessed on a daily basis?
It's all accessible. It's all accessible through Solr. So Solr does all the indexing for us. As far as I know, nothing was actually archived from what we brought over from the previous system. So it's massive. We're talking hundreds of thousands of nodes.
Customer go randomly some nodes and check that.
We did lots of that. Towards the end, we had our whole team that would just be clicking through randomly, just following links and just site checking samples of code. There's no way. We found issues with missing files, and that came down to some files being available some places and not others. So there were a lot of cleanup scripts that we wrote afterwards to re-download files that were missing.
So if there are any embedded images, image tag with the source,
Yep.
where your scripts actually converted those?
Yeah, pulling out the source, downloading the file to the file system, and then importing it as a media object, media entity.
Is this a kind of a part of some module or migrate? Can you plug your stuff inside of the?
It would take a while, I think, to pull it out so that it's generic enough to be used. We definitely considered doing that. It was very specialised what we were doing. It was very, very specific to our needs at the time. I don't know many use cases where what I wrote would be useful. Sorry?
The cleaning was during the migration process.
Yeah.
In the middle.
No, that's right. So in those, I showed the complete and the prepare methods. So in both of those, in the prepare you can clean it, and in the complete you can confirm that it worked. So the saved entity matches the row without anything additional. Yeah.
I think we'll wrap it up there.
Thanks everyone.